Hello everyone, my name is Boulevard. I have returned from my winter break, so to speak. I did the World Championship, and then we got our hotfix patch, and then on that patch, I did the finals of the Aegis Esports League for the Americas, as well as the Mastering Runeterra $1,000 tournament, but I haven't really looked at Legends of Runeterra since we got our second hotfix patch since Worlds happened, the one that sort of took Vayne and Aatrox and Red Gwen and Seraphine off the top and moved us more into this Jinx-focused meta. So what I'm going to be doing today is, as I sort of ease back into both making content and getting back into sort of analysis mode for the seasonal and stuff, I figured I'd give you all a little bit of a look into how I do these kinds of things. So currently it is Monday. This video should be coming out Tuesday, because this is when I always plan to return, is when we were getting into what would be our seasonal patch for the last of the Darkened Saga. Normally we'd get the patch notes today, it'd hit tomorrow, but we already know that that's not happening because we got our emergency hotfix patch a little bit earlier on. So this is actually going to be the first time we're going into a seasonal with a pretty established meta, not the 10-day turnaround that we're sort of used to, but I still need to get back into things. So to give you an idea of where I sit with Runeterra currently, I am in Masters. I am currently in the top 450 with about 120 LP. I've only really been playing FTR since I got to Masters, and this is the only deck that I've played since we got the patch that we're currently on. But what I haven't done is run into any Lulu Jinx, or really any Jinx at all. I played against a couple discard aggros, but I know that it functions so differently from Lulu Jinx that I really can't use that as my baseline. So right now, I'm really kind of torn on Jinx. I even took to Twitter asking people if they thought that it was a targetable deck for the seasonal. Got kind of mixed results, a lot of non-committal answers, a lot of people clicking C results. So I need to figure out how I feel about this deck. And luckily, there is a Mastering Runeterra tournament happening this weekend, so I don't have to just go off of the stats on this one. I actually will get to see it in action in a tournament setting. I will be casting that event as well. So I'll, sort of be right there, ground floor, figuring out how I feel about Lulu Jinx, if it's a targetable deck, and I'll get to see top players compete with it in their lineup against it, their ban strategy, all these different kinds of things, because today, as I'm easing back into the meta, I'm not really looking at matchup charts, I'm kind of just looking at win rate, thinking coherently about lineup composition and things like that. So right now, Lulu Jinx, I just don't really have an opinion on the Jinx decks. For the most part, they feel targetable baseline. There's a lot of just one health units in the Jinx decks, no matter what sort of build you're going for, be it the Lulu Jinx, be it the discard aggro, or if there's any Brave Soul out there still going for the champion strength Jinx build. Either way, you are still just at a lot of one health units, so, that is something that Avalanche decks, Make It Rain decks are looking to target out. But again, I have to dig a little bit more into that later. FTR, I know there's been debates about, do you go for the control version of FTR, or do you go full on the ramp package? And a lot of the decks that I've been seeing are sort of a mix of the two. Bladed Ravine and Avalanche is really all that you kind of need to be a control FTR deck, but that doesn't stop you from playing the ramp spells. And ultimately, I've been having a good time with the deck, but that it's a ladder, take it with a grain of salt. Nora Vigar is just not a deck that I really mesh with. I'm always kind of more down on it than I maybe need to be, but it does seem to lean us towards the meta is not a safe space for mid-range at the moment. It looks like either a lot of control or a lot of aggro. Of course, there are some exceptions, Plunder, as I'll get into, but for the most part, I think that control lineups are going to be prevalent. It's probably going to be Nora Vigar, Trundle, Tryndamere, and then, maybe finding that third deck is a little bit of an issue. I've heard players kind of wishy-washy on other control archetypes at the moment. Heimer Jace, just really not something that is on people's radar, it seems. Or, you could just throw in a Jinx deck if you want to just round out your lineup with some ban bait. Now, Cat Leona is something I'm very interested in. Players going for this more aggressive style of gameplay because Jinx is a top dog. If you do want to go triple aggro, if you think that aggressive decks are just well positioned and you don't want to just play Jinx, you can sort of round that out with Katarina Leona and then a Gwen deck of your choice. Now, Red Gwen took some nerfs, specifically the Fallen Reckoner. I believe there was one other card that I don't even remember. Like I said, it's been a while. I haven't really looked at the patch, but I know that the Minotaur Reckoner specifically went down to a 3-2 instead of a 4-3, or the Fallen Reckoner. So, it's a little bit worse. It dies to Mystic Shot. That is a big deal. It's not pushing as much damage. So I don't think that Red Gwen is dead. I definitely don't think it's the staple that it was before, and I'm not even convinced that it's the best Gwen deck. And what I'm going to be looking for over the next couple of days is the Gwen deck coming down to preference, or is there just a clear best build for Gwen? Because the other ones that stand out in my mind is Gwen Sejuani, which I've talked about a couple of times in the past. This deck consistently pops up in seasonal metas, but, is never really the top Gwen deck or even a solid deck, but I'll get into that in a moment. Because I'm also kind of curious about the Fizz Gwen deck that we saw Red Pup Games play in the finals of the Aegis Esports League. It does get access to Make It Rain if you are looking to leave open the Jinx deck while playing that. So yeah, I think there are going to be quite a few triple aggro lineups, but I think they kind of have to exactly look like Jinx, or not Jinx Lulu, but a Jinx deck, the Katarina Leona deck, and then a Gwen deck. Of course, there is a little bit of leeway there. Annie Jin is not a deck that I mentioned here. You can still slot that in. But I think, like, you're definitely playing a Jinx deck, and then you are sort of filtering between Cat Leona, a Gwen deck, and the Annie Jin. I think that's kind of where you want to be starting on a baseline, and I imagine we'll see quite a bit of that in the tournament this weekend from Mastering Runeterra. Now, if you're looking for more mid-range, I don't think you're getting traditional mid-range. What you're getting instead is a lot of Overwhelm. We've got Gangplank Sejuani, the Darius deck. I don't actually know where it is on the meta chart here. I'm sure it's still on here somewhere. The Darius, okay, here we go. It's down quite a bit, but the Darius Bone Club deck is something that I think is still on people's radars. And if you want to go for a more mid-range lineup, I don't really know why you would want to do this instead of aggro, because I think that if you are playing the Overwhelm decks, my brain says you are weaker to aggro. They're going to go wider on board than you are. You're not going to finish them off as quickly. You know, sure, your big Overwhelm units are hitting face, but I think that they're, for the most part, pushing out more damage with a wider board, with more over-the-top burn out of a Get Excited or a Super Mega Death Rocket or what have you. But you do have a lot of one-drops to actually fight for your position on board, so maybe I'm not giving it enough credit. But I think that, like, Darius, a Gwen deck, and a Jinx deck, or, like, Darius and then, like, Gwen Sejuani is something that you could be looking at. If you do value the Overwhelm strategy, if you think that it's strong, that people are underestimating it, you actually do have nearly a full Overwhelm lineup that you can go for, especially if you value Plunder. So there's a little bit of something for everybody. I think the mid-range is a little bit more aggressively postured than your sort of traditional mid-range player is going to like. But sometimes things just look sort of work out like that. Echo Jinx is another Jinx deck, though this is probably the one that I'm going to be the most down on. It does play the least like other Jinx decks, though, so if you are looking for playing Jinx in your lineup, if you just think that the champion is very strong, but you're worried about something like discard aggro or Lulu Jinx getting targeted, then I think Echo Jinx is where you're going to end up. Or if you are just one of the zillion Echo purists who really likes this list, that's probably where we're going to see it. But I don't think it's going to pick up too much of a play rate. Lurk never makes it in seasonals. The deck is just way too straightforward. Talia Ziggs, I don't really think meshes into the aggro meta super well. If you're going to bring this, you pretty much have to be on the ban Jinx plan, and I don't know that control is going to be prevalent enough for Talia Ziggs to do what it does, and I don't even think Talia Ziggs like does as well into control as it used to. One of the big things missing here is the Hourglass, which was your main control tool. I mean, back when Prodigy won the seasonal, when I was casting with Silverfuse, one of the points that I kept driving home was that I felt that Hourglass decks will always beat Vengeance decks, but even the control decks we're seeing aren't like, you know, there's not a whole lot that I need to Vengeance, and even if I do, you are not, you know, you're not going for the Hourglass to counter, and it is going to have to be a red negation. So Talia Ziggs will probably pop up a little bit, but this is one of those decks I'm going to keep an eye on. I don't have a super big opinion on. Aatrox is something that's a little interesting because when I'm not really paying attention to Runeterra, I'm still on Twitter every day. I'm still seeing what the top players are talking about, and a lot of them have been talking about Aatrox, but one of the issues with trying to get your information from Twitter is that, like, there's no accountability. Players will just, like, say that they think Aatrox is still very strong, and then that's sort of where it starts and stops. There's no, like, you know, I don't get an update on, like, hey, I climbed 300 LP with Aatrox, I entered this tournament, and I have this Aatrox deck. There's no, like, in-depth discussion, which you don't really expect out of Twitter. I'm not saying that, like, this is a problem. I'm just saying that you can't reliably look to what top players say on Twitter as gospel. So Aatrox is still something that I have to look into. I know that the players that I have been seeing their opinions of definitely say that Aatrox Kayn is the best variant of Aatrox right now. You should not be on the Vayne build. You should be on the Aatrox build. But I need to do quite a bit more research into this, and I think this is what I'm going to be looking for the Mastering Runeterra tournament to give me a lot more insight into, is where do I fall on Aatrox decks. I think Seraphine decks, I think myself and the community are pretty in agreement that 7 mana on the back alley bar is just a little bit too much. Yeah, I'm not really seeing any here. Now, Leona, I think, is just in a really good spot. This is like the one mid-range, non-overwhelm style of deck that you are going to see getting pushed through. But I think that the aggressive variant is something that players are just really interested in as the new best Katarina deck, because Katarina is still a very strong champion. Katarina herself was not touched in any way, and I think Red Gwen really pushed this champion to the forefront of everybody's minds. So even if you're not like full aggro on a Leona Katarina, you might still end up seeing just like, I don't want to say a more control-y version, but maybe you slow things down a little bit. You put in Ravenous Phlox because you are still playing, you know, Leona and Solari Sunhawk, so you can stun out your opponent's units. Maybe go a little bit more board-focused mid-range rather than like this aggressive 9-1 drop or even 12-1 drop style of gameplay, but that's something we'll wait and see. But I think that like Leona is just in a very good spot in general, and if you did want to go mid-range, like I would say Leona and Plunder are great starting points. Plunder is kind of a weird one just because I know that the appeal appeal of Plunder is going to be, you know, Make It Rain and Spirits Unleashed wiping these Jinx boards, but that's sort of the question, right? Is do these sweepers work against Jinx in the way that you want them to, or do they have just enough resilient units against these 1 damage abilities in order to make it function? And that's something that I'm going to be looking more into as the week goes on. Again, this video is just kind of like me reintroducing myself to the Legends of Runeterra meta and giving you my thoughts as I sort of rediscover everything. And these will change over the course of the week. Well, you shouldn't take any of this to heart. You should take the Tournament Tactician, my return to that series, later this week to heart when I go over the tier list, and that'll sort of be, you know, that'll be a rough go. Again, I haven't done this in like a month and a half even for a tournament tier list. I've taken quite a long break thanks to the World Championship, and now I have to get everything in order for the seasonal tournament tactic. That one I need to be spot on with. Here we can see like Aatrox Quinn Vane still sitting at like a 59% win rate. Akshan decks still, or Varus decks rather, still doing very well despite the nerfs to the Unforgiving Cold. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. It seems like we have a general idea of what aggro looks like, what control looks like, what mid-range looks like, and it's just going to be like, you know, what flavor of Leona is actually the best one, what flavor of Katarina is, or Gwen rather, is the best one, is Plunder an actual deck, because this is something that tends to like pop up every seasonal, and only a couple of players will be on it and have success with it. And I know that like there are some very good players like Prodigy and Tank that are just still very big on this deck, so, you know, they'll probably do well with it, but can the community at large do well with it? Is Echo something that you need to worry about for the seasonal? Echo has never been like very popular in a seasonal. If you do see Echo topping, it's like 4 or 5 of them. It's not, you know, it's not a contender for top 3. It's not a contender for top 5. So I wouldn't worry about this too much, especially given how much the meta seems to be focused on Jinx right now. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking forward to the tournament weekend to figuring out. But yeah, I just, you know, figured I'd dive back into this, make a simple video, something that's hard to screw up, to get my, you know, dip my toes back in the water and give you guys something, just to give you a baseline into my thought process at the moment of like where I sort of see the meta and where my baselines are going to be as I evolve these opinions over the course of the week. Thank you so much for watching. I will be back with more content later this week as we gear up for the seasonal, and it's all going to be sort of focusing on the seasonal and the changes that have happened since the World Championship. This Mastering Runeterra event is going to be a great window into the competitive circuit, and that's what we're doing.